In this video, I'm going to react to 4 ways British and American houses are very different. And welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. This is the place where I react to music, media, sports, anime, anything related to popular culture. I'll watch it with an open mind and give you my 100% honest reaction to it. And if you could please hit that like button early, I'd really appreciate it. Now, this video is going to be a lot of fun and be very interesting too. One thing I've noticed about American houses compared to our houses here is that it seems that there's quite a lot of more wood involved in their construction, and obviously they're much bigger. Like, it's so frustrating to me because I'm looking to buy a house soon, and you know, for the money that I could spend on a house, I could get like a mansion in some parts of America. It's just unbelievable the amount of space you guys get. But aside from that, I've always wondered, what are the main differences? You know, are things like where you guys put your boilers different? You know, are your kitchens different somehow? I do know that in American sinks, there's usually sometimes like a blade, like installed in the sink that can like chop things up as they're you know, washed down the sink. So that's another difference. But yeah, this video is really going to sort of like show me like what are the real main ones, especially from a guy who's lived in Britain, in the UK, and moved to America, so he kind of, you know, is going to have a lot of info to share. So let's go. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be 4 ways British and American houses are very different. Let's do it.
And tea drinkers that we are, we love our kettles, don't we? But they're not just any kettles. These are ones you plug in and then hit the switch to turn on the plug. Because
yeah, that's another thing. Like, Americans, from what I've seen, don't use the same kind of kettles that we do. You guys boil your water on the stove.
I forgot to mention that our plug sockets also have switches. Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to houses, the things we live inside. If you're watching this video, it's quite likely you're either inside a house right now, or you're near one, because otherwise you wouldn't probably have internet access quite as easily. To anyone that might be new to this channel, come on in, get yourself a cup of tea. This isn't a genuine offer to come into my house. I'm just saying, join the channel, this is good. And hello to everybody who's been here a long time. Today we're going to look at several ways in which British and American houses are very different. Having lived in the United States for over 11 years, I've lived in my fair share.
Oh wow, I didn't realise he's been there that long. Whew, it's a long time.
Here, just as I did in Britain. So I think I have a decent grasp of how houses work. Even tiny ones like this one, which is about 400 square feet. I'm joking, this is a professional studio. Don't question me. And so without further ado, let's take a look at 4 ways that British and American houses are very different. Neither Britain nor America is devoid of variety when it comes to their housing styles, and that's because, well, with each sort of passing phase of history comes new designs to meet new needs and just new style preferences. And because of this variety, I'm not going to cover every single one of them, because that would keep us all here until next Wednesday, which would be good for my metrics, but not good for your sanity. So let's take a look at how some of the housing styles do vary from country to country. In Britain, a lot of the distinctive styles are also tied up with the period in which they were built. So you can go all the way back to the Tudor period, and you do find Tudor housing dotted around here and there. In fact, if you go to the city of York, for example, there's quite a lot of sort of Tudor buildings there. They're quite ornate with wood panelling, and they're the sort of place that you might imagine that Shakespeare lived. But wood is less indicative of British houses than you would see in America, where wood is actually quite a common material for building houses. In Britain, from about the Georgian period onward, you're going to see quite a lot of brickwork. Georgian period houses absolutely exist. People live in them, but they tend to be these opulent looking houses that have notable pops of white rectangle, which are just the windows. It's very nice. They look like dolls' houses that you should live in. But then come the Victorian age, we started moving toward these sort of like orangey brick buildings, right? And a lot of them were terraced houses, which is what Americans would call row houses. And they just look very industrial, right? You could imagine a chimney sweep going up and getting his face covered in soot. And then we move into the Edwardian period, where houses are sort of similar to those of the Victorian age. They're just lighter colours with more chimney sweeps sweeps if Mary Poppins is anything to go by. Now, during World War II, when the Nazis bombed the ever-loving crap out of us, a lot of the houses went boom. And then
So let me guess, we had to build loads of new houses quickly, so we kind of sacrificed style for just speed.
And after World War II, there was a housing boom, and you started to see a build-up of new, more simple houses, kind of like the one I grew up in. Now, that's a castle. That didn't happen, but I grew up in something more like this.
Yeah.
That's not Lawrence's actual house. Despite what fairy tales may suggest, most of us have never lived in a chocolate box house, but those do exist. A chocolate box house is the kind of house you might see in the Cotswolds, right? It's very quaint looking, it's got thatch roofing, and it looks like this. And if, like me, you're wondering why it's called a chocolate box house, yet it doesn't look edible, it goes back to the 1950s/60s when chocolate boxes would have on their facade a kind of depiction of a beautiful English countryside, and these types of houses would often feature on said box. Now again, this is by no means an entire repository of British houses. Neither is the following an entire repository of American houses, it's just the more common ones that you will see when you are here. So Cape Cod houses, you know these types of houses, right? They're the ones with the wood paneling down the side, and I said a moment ago that,
I've seen
America
like
makes good use of wood in this country because there's just so much of it. So many woodlands around the country, and it's a huge country from which to pull that resource, so they do, and it's cheap. But funnily enough, the Cape Cod style has its history with English settlers who came here in the 17th century and started building Cape Cod style houses in New England. Now, during the post-World War II period, partly to provide, housing to veterans coming back from war, there was a revival of Cape Cod style housing, and it started to be built not just in New England, but all along the East Coast and in the Midwest, and even out west. Anybody that's seen the Goonies will know that. And it was this style of housing that I first moved into when I
had to do that sloth reference. I just had to do it.
Moved to the United States, and I've got to say, even despite the Midwest winters, it was really warm. You'd think it would be quite drafty because of all of the gaps in the wood. You could go to specific streets or neighborhoods or areas of the United States and only find these houses for miles and miles. So I lived in one of those, but my grandparents-in-law lived in what is known as a ranch-style house. And these are sort of really low-down buildings, don't typically have 2 floors to them. And once again, these houses became popular after World War II. There was just generally a big sort of boom.
Yeah, it seems like these kind of houses are really popular in Florida as well. Like, I saw quite a lot of those.
After World War II, again in the United States in that regard. The 20th century, though, did see more and more revivalism of old styles. So you had, mock Tudor, or should I say revival Tudor, which more or less replicated the kind of Tudor buildings that you would see in England with some differences. And I've seen those types of buildings in Boston, for example. I've also seen them in Indiana. As well as that, the 20th century saw colonial revivalism, though most people don't live in.
Is it just me, or is Boston kind of one of those places in America that's like sort of the most, or took the most inspiration from England and the UK? Like, from some pictures I've seen of Boston, it seems like there's a really heavy dose of Englishisms in terms of how it's laid out and how the buildings look. Let me know if there's something to that.
Those houses. Maybe one day when I get that grand piano, I'll think about it. And so that's an extremely basic and rudimentary breakdown of some of the different styles that you'll see in each country. But there's one big difference between all of the houses in both countries, and it's this.
Yeah.
Let's face it, it's time to face up to some home truths. Compared to America, Britain is microscopic. The United States is absolutely massive and needs to be stopped. And the same is true of each country's average house size. Right? Yeah. So in the United States, houses just tend to be way more spacious. And we're not just talking about millionaire houses here. We're talking about your average house.
Yep.
So the average size of an American single-family home is approximately 1,600 square feet. In the UK, we're looking at an average of about 900 square feet.
About
so
half.
why the difference? Well, one reason is population density. In Britain, we're all a bit packed together. Actually, that partially accounts for why everything is smaller in Britain. Not everything, not cups. But in America, there's just so much land, and relative to that land, so few people. So, make them as large as you want, and they do. They're huge. But also, a large majority of American houses are relatively new, meaning that they were able to benefit from, building methods and materials that other countries like Britain were not. And the post-war expansion of American highways meant that this was enhanced even more. Those materials could be moved around the country more easily, and of course, this ushered in a more grand housing development. Now, all size aside, try saying that after 10 tepid tequilas, things become subtly different once you're inside the houses of either country. Is gadgets the right word? I don't know. I'll have to fire my graphics team. Either way, we're essentially talking about accessories, the things you have in your house that make that house work, even when you're doing the house work. So, for example, airflow, right? America's bigger on its overhead fans and air conditioning units.
Yeah.
We don't usually use those. I mean,
yeah, that is a big one. Like, I would say, if you went to 10 British houses, you might find one air conditioner, like one. If that, I probably think it's less than that. It's probably like maybe 1 in 50, to be honest. We just don't use them. Maybe it's because the UK probably on average is a lot colder than the US. I feel like there's probably a lot more weather variation. I know that there are some really cold areas in the US, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe the UK is just colder on average.
we like to punish ourselves, especially in the summer, but we can crack a window open and it doesn't get oppressively hot. Always. And so we've mostly been fine with this situation. It does mean that insects get in. So daddy longlegs will get in the house and mosquitoes, but it's a small price to pay for not having air conditioning. I actually quite like air conditioning now that I've lived in the US. Speaking of insects, you also don't see in Britain those insect screens that you put in the windows, hence why they're getting in. In America, they're virtually in every house, but then again, you know, in Britain, we don't have black widows or brown recluses or the types of mosquitoes that make your face go like this. So I can see why it's justified. I mean, you still get ants, or is that just me? Not sure how they get in, maybe cracks in the wall, or maybe through the plug sockets. The plug sockets, of course, are different in both countries too. In Britain, you have the 3-pronged outlets, and in America, you sometimes have 3, but occasionally 2.
Yeah, I wonder, like, what was the reasoning behind the difference here? It would have just made sense to have one unified system, right?
And they're smaller in America than they are in Britain. That's one of the few things about which you can say that. Separate taps, of course, for hot and cold water. Americans combine them all into one. Where's the logic in that? I'm joking. And while we're on the subject of sinks, most British sinks don't have that sort of food waste disposal thing.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about before.
Amazing. That was one of the best things I discovered after I didn't discover it. Somebody else came up with the idea and I just used it. But it's amazing. It's just so pleasing to know that all of that gunk gets broken down, and just don't put your hamster in there. That's I've learned that lesson from someone else. I didn't do it, just read about it on Reddit. Letterboxes. Firstly, Americans don't call them letterboxes, but mailboxes, and typically don't have them on the door, but outside in the garden, yard. The garden/yard is different. Often smaller in Britain, but very well kept up, depending on the family. And just massive yards here with, you know, mesh fences and things like that, or picket fences. Back inside, a lot of properties in the United States will have walk-in closets that are built into the actual walls of the house, whereas in Britain you bring your own closet/wardrobe to put your clothes in, and that takes up more space, I've just realized. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot every step of the way, except when it comes to washing machines and dryers. How cool is this? We combine them both into one giant cube, whereas America has 2 separate cubes. And tea drinkers that we are, we love our kettles, don't we? But they're not just any kettles. These are ones you plug in and then hit the switch to turn on the plug, because I forgot to mention that our plug sockets also have switches. And then, you know, you turn it on, don't need a stovetop, and it heats up. Just like that. You've got your water, Bob's your uncle, pour it into a mug, there's your cup of tea. In America, you do have the stovetop kettles, and part of me likes that because it does this really pleasing whistling sound at the end. Now, if you were paying attention during that list, you may have noticed that I touched on some of the terminological differences when it comes to housing in either country. And that brings us on to our final entry. It wouldn't be Britain and America if they weren't 2 countries separated by a common language, and the same is true of the house.
Separated by a common language. Nicely done.
Housing world. So let's finish with a rapid fire round looking at those very words. So here in Chicago, I live in a flat. Except in America, they don't call it flat. It's called an apartment. Something else that you'll find in America, though, are these condominiums or condos, if you don't fancy saying a word that has condom in it. And we do have those in Britain. They're usually called
Excuse me.
common hold properties. And I suppose most British people wouldn't go around using that term, whereas you actually hear the term condo quite a lot. It's been suggested to me that I move into a condo, and it sounds good. I mean, when I first heard the term, I thought it sounded like I might be moving onto a lakeside boat or something like that. It is like an apartment, but it's one you would buy. It's real estate. Now, as a child and young adult, I grew up in a house that was known as a semi-detached house. That's when you have a house adjoined to one other house on one side, but not on the other side. In the United States, States, this is known quite simply as a duplex, which is not a wrestling move. If it is adjoined on both sides with another house, then you are part of a line of houses that are known as terraced houses in Britain.
Yeah.
In America, they're known as row houses because they're all in a row, presumably. Then there's council housing in Britain versus the projects in the United States, and that's just another way of saying public housing. To control the electricity flow in Britain, you have the mains power. In America, you have the grid power. And what if you're sick and tired of the place that you're living in and you just want to relocate somewhere else? In America, you would just simply move. In Britain, you'd move house. And on that note, I'm going to move out to my outro transition because this is the end of the video. Let me know in the comments below if you're watching this from your house right.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Like, there was quite a few differences that I was aware of, like the building materials, the size of the houses, but I wasn't quite aware of, you know, the difference in terminology. Like, I would have assumed that, you know, the terminology would be the same. Like, a duplex would be, you know, just we call it a semi-detached house. I don't know why I thought that, considering, you know, there are so many, you know, the same words that we use here usually have a different version or a different word for that thing in America. But yeah, no, that was really interesting, you know, just learning about the different terminology and stuff. Yeah, that was a fun watch. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and keep throwing the recommendations my way. I know I say it all the time, but they genuinely help me out, because if I know you enjoyed watching something, I'll definitely enjoy reacting to it. So like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, keep throwing the recommendations, and I'll catch you in the next one.